Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR, a weekly podcast where we explore the forces shaping our roles today, from new technologies, shifting expectations to tightening budgets. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Before we get going, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Instant Impact, for supporting this episode. Instant Impact happens to be my company, and we're making world-class talent acquisition a reality for SMEs by providing a range of embedded talent solutions, from full recruitment outsourcing to workforce planning and other advisory services. If you're in HR and you're overwhelmed with the sheer volume or complexity of recruitment challenge, then please do get in touch. Visit instant-impact.com, where you'll be able to book in a call. Just specify that you've come in through the podcast, and I'll personally jump on a call to talk through your talent acquisition strategy headaches. Now, on with the show. In huge strides when it comes to talking about mental health over the last decade. When I started my career, it would have been pretty unusual for leaders to talk about anxiety, burnout, or depression openly. Since then, most companies have moved away from a leave your issues at the door kind of approach and embrace the truth. And that's that it's impossible to separate how you feel in yourself from how you perform at work. Over that same time period, we have been experiencing a mental health epidemic with levels of depression, anxiety, and just general stress at an all-time high worldwide. The combination of these two mega trends means that people leaders are now expected to be part psychologist, part counselor, alongside all of our other responsibilities. And there's a lack of training, a lack of capacity and resources that can sometimes leave HR professionals feeling overwhelmed and even underskilled to deal with employees in crisis. Or even worse, we can fall back onto a party line of, hey, just call the EAP, that's what they're there for. It can be really hard to know how much support to give, when to call in the pros, how much to share about your own mental health with your colleagues. And to help us make some headway here, I have invited the incredible Jasmine Francis onto the show. Jasmine is a career head of people, is passionate about mental health and DEIB, and has worked at businesses like Pliancy, Felix, and if you look at the rest of her resume, you can understand why she has so much experience in high-pressure workplaces, companies like BNY Mellon, AppNexus, Goldman Sachs, and Carlyle Group. Jasmine, we're super lucky to have you with us today, and I am thrilled to welcome you to We Need to Talk About HR.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. And, Felix, as you know, this is a super important topic. For me, it resonates directly with me, but most importantly, it impacts basically every human in the world. So I'm really excited that you invited me on. Thank you so much for your grace with that. And I am ready to jump in.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump in with a really broad question then. What do you see the role of HR as when it comes to mental health in the workplace?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I think there are a lot of debates around that topic. I do think, to your point in the intro, HR used to be looked at as, paper pushers, very bureaucratic, hiring and firing. And to your point, as we've kind of, evolved, the world looks very different. I think there's been a lot of focus on the dualities of all of our responsibilities. And I do personally think that, the employee well-being is absolutely under the remit of HR/people. I think that there are boundaries to it. Number one, obviously, the organization, the HR people cannot be responsible for what happens outside of the workplace. However, we are responsible for making sure that we are providing a super psychologically safe environment, an inclusive culture, all of these things that contribute to a positive mental well-being space. So that's the things that we as HR can control. And I think something else we can control is just kind of being in the know of what's happening from a legislation perspective, what's happening in each respective state that we have an employee base in. I think, the rules and regulations are looking a lot different as far as, what you can and cannot do, included in the disability list from an ADA perspective. And so, I do think it's our responsibility to be proactive and think ahead on not only to your point around what are the resources we can provide our people, but what's coming down the pipeline that we could leverage to better support our people.
That's really interesting. I'm going to pick you up on the very first point that you made, which is what we can't do, which is we can't control what happens outside of the workplace.
Right.
And I think when it comes to mental health, it's always easiest for me to talk about my, from a personal perspective. But I found
Sure.
the times that I've struggled the most at work are the times that I've struggled the most personally in my personal life.
Mhm.
If I'm going through, you know, a big life change, if I'm worried about family, when I was, younger and partying too much and, burning the candles at both ends. Those were the things that really impacted my mental health. And then my mental health impacted my work life. So
Mhm.
how do you draw those lines between work and and not work?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, the triggers or the activity, the actions, whatever it is that's contributing or causing any mental health challenges that's happening outside of the office, we're not responsible for. However, to your point, that feeling, that emotion doesn't just stop at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning and then come back at 6, 7 o'clock at night. To your point, it's a part of our holistic well-being. And so it's going to show up when we're trying to do our work. It's going to show up when we are doing presentations. And I think that's when it's the HR's responsibility to make sure that to the extent that during that time they are working, we are providing the best culture and atmosphere as possible. And I think you're 100% right. For me, I have so many personal struggles, and some things are triggered at work and some aren't. But the things that are not triggered at work, the things that are triggered at work is a whole different thing. But the things that aren't triggered at work, when I come in every day, I can't just cut it off. But what I can do is communicate with my manager, hey, I'm not in a great space today, or this just happened. I don't have to go into details because it's no one's business, right? But I may need some extra support today. And that's just from a manager perspective. And I think that's why it's important for managers to not only know how to be managers, but to also be leaders and have training, honestly, on well-being support, mental health support. There's a lot of organizations now that are offering toolkits and training for managers so that when their people aren't in a good place, they're not triggering them even more. And I do think that there's sometimes that kind of gets lost in the sauce of, okay, the culture is what's supposed to solve, well-being and mental health, but it's your colleagues, it's your manager, it's psychological safety, it's the way you communicate, all these things that happen under the roof of the office, which fall in my purview.
So interesting. And I think the role of the HR leader, I think what you're saying is the role of the HR and people leader is to provide the tooling within the organization to make sure that there's the right support at the right levels to deal with either that, to deal either that stress from work or that stress from outside of work, those issues from outside of work, so that they know how to create a safe space to get on with your job or not, as the case may be. Okay,
Exactly.
that's really interesting. I think I'm not sure if I'm right on this one, so I'd be
Okay.
interested to get your perspective on it. But I feel like because there's more awareness now around
Hmm.
mental health. I think that a lot of it's been driven in the corporate world rather than the non-corporate world, the world outside. Uh, and so I wonder whether companies have a role to play in making their employees more resilient or better able to deal with the challenges that we all face from a mental health perspective. Is there a role that companies play in, I suppose, just making us more resilient and making us better able to train our own mental health?
Now that is a good question. Hmm. You know what? I'll share what I've seen. I think there's some organizations that are more committed to it than others. There are some organizations that I think have a better understanding that employees are humans first before they're employees. And so I have seen, and even in one organization that I worked at, I've seen more progressive approaches to help employee resilience. And so, for example, a company that I worked at previously provided a resilience app. And I don't remember the name of it, but it actually was something that the organization, I think, got a great package with. And every employee had the opportunity to download this resilience app, and you got asked questions every day on the app to help build your resilience in and out of the workplace. Oh yeah, and actually, I was the first to download that, and I was like, but I
Must
do
become
think,
more resilient.
yeah, I'm like, can we have a 2.0, a 3.0? But I do think that there are things that can be done on an organizational level. But I do think organizations have to think very intentionally and thoughtfully about how do you measure that? So you have provided, these resources and tools to help employee resilience, but what does that really mean? How are you measuring whether the resilience has gotten better? What does that look like? And how do you make sure that it's being applied, those skill sets, new skill sets are being applied in tough situations within the office? I think that's where it can get a little tricky because organizations, I think, we all know that they're financially run, right? Like, regardless of how many people and how much we care about humans, it's always about the ROI. And so I do think, if organizations don't have the additional funds to invest in some type of resilience tools, then they figure out ways where they can get an ROI to make sure that whatever they're doing to provide employees with that skill set, it's actually being applied in the office, because that's the whole point of it, right? So I would say, there's apps out there. I know, I actually have a good friend who's a founder of kind of like a mental fitness app
Oh, cool.
that she is in the process of rolling out. So there are
Oh,
things
go on, Jasmine.
out
Let's
there.
give it a plug while we're here.
Oh, it's called, I want to say, Mindy,
Mindy. Well,
MYN.
we'll check it
Yeah,
out. We'll share that in the show links.
MYY. Yes, yes. And she's been working on it actually for a very long time. And I think she has a similar story where, there's apps for workout trainings, physical. So why are there not apps for mental training to help train your brain on resilience? So I think honestly, it just varies on the investment that the organization's willing to go, the resources, and really how progressive the organization really is.
No, absolutely, and we got to operate within a world of practicality as well, and I think that's something that sometimes gets lost in these lovely conversations we have on the podcast. Often you're operating within a business that existed before you joined it and has its ways of working. So you got to do, I know you got to do stuff. You got to do stuff within that. But I completely agree with you. I think it's a great place to invest. Now, there's somewhere that you maybe don't need to make an investment, but is really, really important. And you mentioned it in your very early statement, and that's managers. I'm always fascinated by how influential managers are in setting the tone, in making
Mm,
sure that the work gets done within the culture and standards of an organization, and how important they are for well-being in a business as
mm,
well. And yet how little focus they get from organizations, how little training they get, and how few resources they have to call on. So how do you think businesses can equip their managers to be there in the right way for their employees when it comes to or their team members when it comes to mental health?
Another good question. You're just on the roll, Felix. I think there's actually a couple of ways to look at it. I think, number one, we need to look at it holistically. And number two, we need to take a step back from the starting point. Managers either come in as managers or they're promoted as managers. And I do think for the managers who come in as managers, it's really important that on that job description, it's not just saying, these are the education requirements, these are the, responsibilities, this is the type of background we want for a candidate. It's also about, let's talk about the human skills. Do they understand how to support humans? Do they understand how to communicate effectively? Do they understand how to be an advocate for their people? Those are the skills that I think are missing in a lot of job descriptions. It's so focused on experience, but experience says nothing about their ability to show up for their team, their ability to be able to think intentionally about what to say in times of crisis, right? And I think on the promotion end of it, and I've seen this so many times and it's so annoying, is a lot of times organizations promote off of either favoritism or based on results solely or based on tenure. And a lot of the times the feedback of the people that report to them is not a part of that criteria, and or their ability again to show up as humans and their ability to promote, advocate, support, grow their team. And so it perpetuates this narrative of now we have all these managers who are getting paid a ton of money because they're good at their work. They're good at pushing results for their team. I'm sure they're brilliant, but they're lacking the human skills of leadership. And I think that's how we continue to perpetuate this issue. And so it just makes the challenge even more and more harder, because then when you have HR try to come and, provide some framework around, hey, we need you to level up here, here, and here. At that point, the employee is saying, well, I'm making six figures. I've already gotten promoted twice. Why does this matter now? And so it makes our job a lot harder. So I would look at it one way from the entry point perspective. I think the other way is organizations need to understand that middle management and managers in general, like you said, are like the gold of the company. They can either make or break not only their employees' trajectory, but the trajectory of the organization as a whole. And so many times when managers start or when they're in a new role, it's like, we got to have them hit the ground running. We should have had them in that seat yesterday. So we don't have time for training. The client this, or we need this deliverable this. And it's like, wait a minute. If we just take the time to invest in it on the front end, the back end results will be endless. And then you don't have to worry about the high attrition. You don't have to worry about the attrition on their team. You don't have to worry about the additional costs of new hiring and new training. And I think that just gets lost because we get so excited to have them do work versus taking a step back and saying like, oh, their job is so much more than their work. They have an instrumental job in our turnover numbers, our revenue, the well-being of the organization, the culture, et cetera.
It's so interesting. I'm reminded of a quotation, and I think often businesses are in that perspective where they're like, yeah, of course, we wish we had better managers, but it's going to take so much work to get them there, and it's going to take so long. And there's a fantastic quotation. Quotation is, the best time to plant a forest is 80 years ago. The second best time is today. It's just like, yeah, great. Sure, you should have done it before. Sure, it's going to take a long time, but you got to get started sometime, right? And I really feel that's a good way to think about any kind of training, any kind of sort of organizational development and investment that you're making in your business.
Yes, I agree.
So we're talking about the sort of different pieces that HR and managers can put in place to really build up mental health, but build up resilience in the organization. Now, I remember our very first conversation we ever had around this. Both of us talked about EAPs and how weirdly sometimes they can do more harm than good, or they can get in the way, even though they're a sort of well-meaning addition to the organization. Where do you think those sorts of programs can be a detriment? Where do you think they can be a help?
Yeah, you know what? And I'm just going to be really blunt and honest. I think, having EAP is like the absolute minimum, the bare bones that any organization should have when we think about, mental health support, well-being, some type of professional support. I will say the times that it works is in that scenario. If there's absolutely nothing else, no other support line for an organization, then great. EAP is something, it's better than nothing. However, the effectiveness of that is always questionable. Back in the day, EAP, when it was first rolled out, it was, what is this? We have a third party professional that can help our employees with personal and professional challenges. It was the cool thing because there was absolutely nothing else out there like it. But now it's been years and years and years. I think the last time I personally used an EAP program was probably back in 2009. And so the world has looked significantly different since then. We've had the pandemic, social injustice being more publicly out. I mean, there's just so many contributors to our mental health. And I think now there's a more focus on the fact that employees have more responsibility outside of the workforce, such as we're caregivers, we're parents, we're children, we're sisters, brothers, all these things. And so if the bare minimum that an organization can do is EAP, fine, I'll take that. But it becomes detrimental when, and I'll speak from my personal experience, I had a really traumatic situation happened back in 2009. And I had gone to my manager and I was crying hysterically. And she was helpless. She felt so bad. And she was like, call the EAP number. And I remember the first time I called the EAP, because I think you got 3 calls. The first call, the representative was like, yeah, I'm not skilled in this. Maybe call back and get another representative. Called back. I think we got maybe 20 minutes into the conversation and he was like, time is up. Sorry. Can't talk to you
Oh
anymore.
no.
The third time it was, it was like a 5-minute conversation. Here's some resources, some websites. So I walked away feeling like, number one, my company didn't really care about how big of a deal this really was for me, and that they didn't understand that the more they invest in me, the better I can be as an employee. Number two, I felt like EAP, and this is again my personal experience, they gave me the bare minimum of just let me check the box. They didn't care about me. They don't know me. I'm a stranger. I'm just a number. And I think that the third part that I think where it can become detrimental is at that time, if I would have been in a mental health episode, if I would have been in a depression state, and then I'm getting that type of feedback from a professional, that would trigger me times a million, right? So I think those are 3 scenarios where it can be more detrimental to someone who's asking for help.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, well, first of all, I'm sorry you had to go through that, and it's also,
Yeah.
it's sort of not not good enough that that's the level of support that so many people get. I feel like we should definitely put a disclaimer in there, which is that I'm sure there are some fantastic EAPs out there
Yeah.
that do the
That's
do the
just my
full
personal
wraparound service.
experience.
Um, but I do think it's interesting when you're in that really fragile state, you're in that trauma state or you're in that depressive state. I mean, even if you're in a high anxiety state, it takes so much effort to call a line, or it can do.
Good
It
point.
you only get one crack at making sure that that's a good first experience, and that then the treatment sort of can carry on from there. Um,
Right.
I yeah, I remember my own experience looking for um some support. It wasn't after a traumatic episode, but I was in a funny place, as we say, and as we Brits say, sort of downplaying everything to do with mental health.
Ah,
Um,
okay, so you were
um,
not in a good place.
yeah, yeah, right. Um, and yeah, I had exactly the same sort of concept, which was, they were very nice, I have to say. They were very nice, very supportive, but
Mhm, mhm,
the feedback was, I'm not qualified to take this. Please call
mhm.
this number, and someone will get back to you. I called that number, no one picked up. I left a message and I never heard back, and I never tried again. I kind of just got through it with on my own and with my family. And you're right, that's where it becomes really detrimental, doesn't it? Where
Mhm.
the the service levels are almost, I guess, they're very difficult to track, and you
Right.
don't know whether your team are getting the level of service they need, because it's all confidential.
That's an excellent point. And actually hearing your story, and I'm sorry that that was your experience as well. But after hearing you share, it made me think about the angle from an inclusivity and diversity perspective, because in your situation, they gave you a number and, didn't hear from from anyone, no one called you back. And, you were grateful enough to have other, internal resources personally to help you
Hmm.
get through it. There's a lot of people in this world that don't have that. They don't have that type of support system. They may not even know their parents. They may be in this world by themselves. And for people like that, where do they go? What do they do? Right. And so I think there's a assumption that, okay, well, maybe we provide EAP, but they can get additional support
Mm.
elsewhere. Well, we don't know that, right? And I think, organizations need to think as though we don't know the circumstances of anybody that works here. We don't know where they come from, what they've been through, what their family or friend dynamic is, what their support life looks like. And so with that, from an employer perspective, we have to really, really be thoughtful about how we invest in support mechanisms that would support anybody, regardless of where you come from, because we all have different stories, and not one works for everyone else.
That's so right. So, how would you recommend that we stress test the support mechanisms that we're looking to put in place or that we already have in place to ensure that that is the case?
Yeah, you know what the first thought that comes to my mind is great benefits. I think that's something that's, I don't want to say low hanging fruit, because obviously it's going to be very expensive for the organization, but if everybody has the same level of quality health insurance, even more so if the organization is able to cover that for employees, it puts everyone at the same starting point of, okay, my life may look different from everyone else's. However, I know that I can still get the same level of support professionally, whether that's from therapists, psychiatrists, nutritionists, etc. I think that's one way. Another way is, and what I found to be very effective, is when organizations partner with programs or other organizations that are focused on mental health, employee well-being, mental well-being. There's apps out there like Calm. I know that they partner with a lot of organizations. Insight Timer. There's so many, and I think giving people that type of accessibility goes a long way. And no, it may not solve their problems, but again, it gives everyone an equal starting point for quality access. And that's the gap that we're experiencing when I think organizations just pick one way that may not impact everybody.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Well, I'm really keen that we get onto the sort of my final big topic that I wanted to talk about today, which is,
Right.
so we've spoken
Let's do
about the
it.
roles that HR and people teams can play. We've spoken about the roles that managers can play. I'd love to talk about the roles that leaders can play, and particularly when it comes to vulnerability. Um,
Mm.
I think being a leader in an organization, and specifically talking about um, the example that you're setting for people, I think there's two schools of thought. There's the strong, like, I am going to portray myself as a strong and successful and powerful leader, and then people will respect me and want to be like me. And then I think there's a really interesting, somewhat new kind of leadership that's emerging, which is more, hey, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to tell them, who I really am. I'm going to be open about my mental health challenges or physical health challenges or whatever that looks like. I guess two questions. First of all, which one do you think works best in an organization? And then secondly, um, where do you think where do you think the risks are with that kind of approach?
Yeah, so I personally, and I think, approach effectiveness probably varies on person. But for me, I've been in the HR space for 16 years. I've been around the block a little bit, and I've tried a couple of different ways. For me, what's been effective is the latter. And that's just based on my own personal challenges that I deal with. I and I know I had shared with you, I struggle with my own mental health challenges. I deal with depression, anxiety, borderline personality disorder, complex trauma, all of the things. So how I'm feeling may vary every day when I wake up. How I'm feeling may vary at 3 o'clock every day, may vary when I'm going to bed. And so, prior to this becoming more prevalent in my life, I definitely was option one. I need to show that I have it all together. I need to show that I deserve to be a leader. I need to show what I want my team or others to aspire to be like. And what that should be like is someone that has all the answers, that's always put together. And you kind of talk about your struggles in private. And that worked, but that worked. It didn't work fully, but it worked. It was okay. I think for me, where I started to feel conflict was I wasn't feeling authentic in how I was showing up, because I'm a very down to earth person and I don't ever think that I know the world. I'm a human just like everyone else. And it was feeling inauthentic to show up in a way as though everything was okay when I was just crying for hours before getting on the bus to get to work. And so I was putting more energy and it was becoming harder for me to show up as option one than to maybe try option two, which was to just kind of risk it and start to say, I'm not feeling good today. Or, I, had a suicide attempt in 2019. I've been struggling ever since then. It took me years to figure out, for me again personally, that it's okay to show that you're not perfect and that you don't have all the answers. And yes, I'm a leader. Yes, I'm an executive. Yes, I've been in the HR space for a while, but that doesn't make me more suited for anything else over somebody else, because we all bring different skill sets to the table. And when I am managing a team, when I'm leading a team, I want to hear from them because they have experiences and knowledge that I don't. And so when I kind of started to test it out to say, you know what, not feeling good today, to see how people responded, one of the first times I did it was like, wow, sure. What type of support do you need? We got you. We want you to feel okay. And as I kind of kept, trying that approach, it just started working. And number one, it built a lot of transparency within my team because they saw that it's okay to say that you're not having a good day. I think number two, it built a lot of trust because it showed that number one, I trust them to still keep the train going when I'm out and vice versa. I think to your point, it spoke to the importance of vulnerability and that their voice is just as equal and important as my voice. Yeah, I'm the one leading the team, but they're here too. And I want them to feel included in this journey that we're on. And so to your point, there are risks with that approach. I mean, I've definitely seen other people do that approach. And I've seen, maybe team members start to take advantage of them and say, oh, well, I wasn't feeling good for 3 weeks. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true, or, I've seen some of the reaction to that approach potentially be, well, that they are too sensitive or they're too vulnerable. They care more about feelings than work. I need somebody that's more driven. And there can sometimes be a lot of judgment that comes with vulnerability and truth and honesty. And that's okay too. I mean, I think everyone's at a different place in their lives, but for me and how I hire my team, the type of culture I need to be around, um, this has been really effective for me. And it's built an accountability culture where my team and the people around me understand that I'm not perfect and they're not perfect. And there's nothing wrong with taking accountability to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't know it all. That's the type of leaders that I want to develop. I don't want to develop leaders who stand in and say, I know everything and show up that way. That's just not my style, right? So there's definitely risk with that approach, but I've been grateful enough that it's helped me build really, really tremendous teams.
You know what? It's incredible. It's incredible hearing you speak about it. So about the the
Yeah.
challenges you've been through. So in such a matter of fact way, and I think far from I think from the when I think about it, and I am like you. I like to be really transparent about how I'm feeling. I think it's really powerful. It helps me in my personally in work and to be able to get the most out of my team and for them to get the most out of me. But just hearing you say it out loud my big concern about telling people about it is that they'd see weakness. All I see in you saying something like that is just a huge amount of strength, just being able to say, no, this is what I've been through, this is how I'm feeling, let's work around it. And it's definitely, the alternative to that is to bottle it up, underperform. No one knows why you're underperforming. People need to step in for what you're doing. Everything falls apart, you burn out, then you're off work for 3 months or whatever it looks like. That's the weakness. That's the weakness
You're
side of
so
things.
right. You're so right. That's a great point.
Well, I'm really glad that we were able to touch on that today, Jasmine. So I think that's sadly all we're going to have time for today.
We just got started, it feels like.
I know. Well, we're gonna have to get you back on the show another time, and we'll pick up another contentious topic to tackle. But you've been a fantastic guest. I always think
Yeah.
it's a good sign when you laugh all the way through an interview. That's that's
Especially with
always the
topics like
best
this,
part.
right?
Well, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join us next week as well.
Thank you.